eyes. And so I'm going to step aside here and ask them to put the first slide up. What do you see? Just shout it out. Two people, a vase. Okay, let's take a look. This is the vase, and these are the two people. How many of you initially saw the vase? How many of you saw the two people? See, we're about split. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. What do you see? A young woman, an old lady, or both. Now, if you carefully look here, here's the chin of the young lady, here's her nose, here's her ear, but otherwise, and here's her hair. Otherwise, you can see the old woman, here's her nose, and her chin, and her hair. Finally, the last one. This one always seems to cause the greatest amount of trouble. What do you see here? You saw what? A man? Or a mouse? How many saw a mouse or a rat? How many saw a man? This is the one that people have a hard time with. If you look carefully, here's the mouse with their mouth and their big ears and the tail coming on down. Well, actually, here's the man's eyes, his nose, his mouth, his chin, and his ears. Isn't it interesting how we're pretty much split in looking at these. You can take it down now. You're pretty much split at looking at these different things because why? We all have a different perspective of something. Webster's dictionary tells us that perspective means a mental view or outlook. It is the interrelation in which a subject or its parts are mentally viewed. Not too long ago, there was a topic on the minister's listserv that was generating a major discussion that went on for several days. I have to tell you that it was not always a very friendly discussion. Tempers began to flare, and everyone was trying to convince each other that their perspective was right and the other person's perspective was wrong. Needless to say, the discussion became heated. And one of the ministers sent out why communication on a given topic is so difficult through an email. She stated, you know how you create a world in your imagination when you're reading a novel. You don't have pictures, you don't have any, so your mind begins to create what you think the author is talking about. And let's just say that the author begins the story with characters being on the beach and they're having a conversation. And you think immediately of Hawaii. Warm sands, gentle breezes, sun on your body. And that might not be what the author was thinking about when they wrote the book. But yet you've created that vivid picture in your mind. And then all of a sudden, a made-for-TV movie shows up, and they show that it's really the East Coast. And as the scene opens, the characters aren't tanned. They're not in slim bathing suits. They're bundled up in long pants and hoodies with a blanket around them. They're sitting on cold, damp sand around a fireplace because it's not warm at all. What we believe we're reading may not be what the person was trying to say in the novel at all. We create within our minds according to our beliefs, our history, our experiences, our ancestry, and so much more. Everyone may be reading the same thing, but they are not experiencing the exact same thing, just like nobody saw the exact same picture on the screen. Dr. Jen Wright in The Four Pivots tells us we all have limitations about what we see without an awareness of our limitations. We believe that our version of the world is the version of the world. The idea is easier to say than it is to put it into practice, because you see, we need some assurance that our experience and interpretation of the world is based on fact and has meaning. Much like Reverend Angelica's explanation for the novel, Jen Wright explains that our perspective on a given topic is what helps us to confront issues in our world. As he puts it, how else will we confront racism when we see it? Or how else will we address homophobic behavior in our family? And how else will we address or call out sexist language as sexism among our friends? It is our perspective of an issue such as these that give us insight into the world of how power and oppression works, even if it's invisible to most people. Most of us believe that our version of the world is the right version. We only need to look at the divide in our nation right now as we deal with the war between Gaza and Israel to understand how everyone thinks that their perspective is right. Look at the parades and the signs happening on the universities. It is the belief that I am right and you are wrong that keeps us from coming to the table to talk, to negotiate, to compromise. Each of us needs assurance that our experiences and interpretations of the world are based in facts and meaning. We want to know that our ideas, our concepts, our thoughts have meaning and are important, not only to ourselves, but to others as well. I remember early in my college psychology classes how we would study families. It always fascinated me as how in a family of two or more siblings that each had a different perspective of what the family was like. Each of the siblings was raised in exactly the same family, same parents, same household, but the birth order, the parental responses they received, the schooling, or many more factors affected their individual perspective of what each member of the family was like. I have experienced that more than once working with families as the siblings come together to prepare their parents' celebration of life process. The truth is that sometimes we're not aware of how our personal perspective of an issue can shine light onto something and yet obscure another. Most of the time, we do not question what we see. We just act as if it's true, and we move forward, failing to dig into the issue deeper and look at the multiple perspectives. A few years ago, I was visiting my niece in Georgia, and my great niece was on a traveling fast pitch softball team. And so my niece Emily and I and Kendall took off for 3 days to attend this tournament. And so we were staying out of town, and we were sitting in the motel breakfast room area with several of the other mothers one morning. And I wasn't quite surprised when the topic of Obama's presidency came up. And a couple of the women were sharing once again yet another discussion of how he was wrong. I politely interrupt them and ask, "Where did you hear that?" My niece promptly gave me a warning look and kicked me under the table. One of the women responded, "Well, I read it on Facebook." And I bit my tongue as I asked, as nice as I possibly could, if she had read anywhere else or seen it verified on one of the major networks. No, she hadn't, and I let it drop as much as I wanted to pursue it. As we head into another political year, I can't encourage you enough to find reliable sources and to check more than one source for information as you continue to share it. And why does this matter? Because it's important that we understand and acknowledge the bigger picture. When we're able to pivot our perspective, we become aware of that our curiosity will help us see more than we currently do. It's not just about being right or wrong. It's about becoming aware that our perspective may be limited. Jen Wright tells the story of his wife, Nedra, in the book and her experience with a Lyft driver. Now, they live in Oakland, and often their front yard is filled with political signs or signs that have a message like kindness is everything or Black Lives Matter. And as Sean puts it, he said, we live in the Bay Area with the progressive kinds of stuff in our yard. Nedra and her daughter were heading for the airport, and they had ordered a Lyft driver. The driver arrived, and he was obviously a white man in his 60s. They placed their luggage in the trunk, closed it up, and got in the back seat. And before they pulled away, Nedra noticed that the driver was carefully reading all of the political signs in the front yard. He didn't nod or didn't say anything. And so Nedra thought that it was time to greet him, being the bubbly, warm, kind of happy person that she is. Hey, how you doing today? And the driver gave no response. Nedra, being a friendly person, tried a new approach. Hello, it's a nice morning, isn't it? Still no response. Nedra could not stand it any longer being ignored, and she concluded that this man, because he was over 60, because he was gray-haired, he was white, based on his age and his race, he must be conservative. Besides that, he was driving two black men to the airport, and his racism must be absolutely raging. She just knew that he had seen all of the progressive signs in the yard, and he must be upset. Not wanting to give up, she made a third attempt to reach him. What do you think about the signs in our front yard? He still gave no reply. Now, Nedra was absolutely furious, and she turned to her daughter. Did you see that? He really is ignoring me. And her daughter calmly responded, Mom, he's not ignoring you. He didn't hear you. And she pointed to the sign that said deaf driver. From her limited perspective, she had made an assumption that the driver was conservative. How often do we do that? It's like trying to put a 1,000-piece puzzle together without a picture to guide us. We can figure out that there's a tree and a lake and a sunset and a house, but we have no idea what it is without the picture to guide us. A pivot on our perspective means we become more aware of the things in our lives that obstruct how we see and act within our world. Carl Jung once stated, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When we're irritated by someone's political affiliation, how they dress, or maybe the tattoos that adorn them, it's time to take a look at our own perspective of the issues. Why do we feel that way? What has been our experience with this issue in the past? Do we associate it with someone we don't like? Is it an old tape that served a purpose at one time but is now no longer necessary? All of those are healthy questions to ask ourselves. We are never too old to shift our perspective and change. John Lubbock stated, "What we see is mainly what we look for." Have you ever noticed that when you're shopping for a new item like a car or a TV or a computer, you're pretty sure which model you really want to buy, and then all of a sudden that's all you begin to see is the car you want or the computer you think would be best. And of course that reaffirms what your choice is, that that's the one to buy. Well, the same thing happens with politics or issues that affect you, your community, and our country. We tend to gravitate and associate with people who think and believe the same way that we do. We look for written articles or TV stations and people that affirm I'm right and you're wrong. Ernest Holmes tells us the perspective of reality is lost when we view life from the range of a short experience. When we fail to look at and review all perspectives of an issue, we are shortchanging not only ourselves, but those we work with, know, and love. It's kind of like driving in the fog. We can't see the scenery on the side of the road. We can't see too far down either because it's obstructed by the fog. So you begin to make assumptions of what is beyond the 100 feet or what is on the side of the road. But you can never be sure because your view is obstructed. Perspective is about seeing close up and far away at the same time. It's about seeing through the fog. When we're close to a situation, we have a deeper understanding of issues such as poverty, racism, immigration, and homophobia. Being far away, however, gives us a bird's eye view of an issue so we can understand the root and the systemic cause of why something is the way it is. System change researchers have identified ways that all of us can cultivate perspective. Just imagine an iceberg with 4 separate levels to it, and the first is the very tip, which represents the event and things that happen within a system. That system could be a family, a business, our community, our country, society as a whole. Next level down are the patterns, which are the trends that happen over time. The third level are the structures which represent the relationships that created the patterns on the previous level. At the deepest level of the iceberg are the mental models. The model includes assumptions and beliefs and values we personally have. Notice assumptions and beliefs and values are the deepest level on the iceberg, which to me symbolically represents our subconscious. I believe the most important level of this model is the last one. If we're not willing to look at our own assumptions and beliefs and values, then nothing will ever change. This is a huge pivot. It means we have to be personally willing to watch our own and others' potential interpretations of an issue or a given situation. Interpretation occurs when we give meaning to something and accept it as its entirety in truth without investigating it. If we want to come to a greater understanding, we have to question our assumptions. Then we must ponder our own meaning of an event or a situation in the world. Recently, I was talking with a friend, and she indicated to me that she was praying that a certain candidate would not be elected president in the fall. My response was simple. I said, pray for a positive shift in the consciousness of America. After all, it is our collective consciousness that has gotten us to where we are today with our politics and all of our deplorable isms. The only way it is going to change is if our collective consciousness is transformed. It is that process of moving from trying to influence our beliefs on others to creating lasting change from within. There was a man by the name of Malcolm who lived in a gorgeous home that was surrounded by lush, tall, and beautiful trees. The entire neighborhood enjoyed the privacy and the shade that the trees provided. And one day, Malcolm noticed that Keisha, his neighbor behind, was building something in her backyard. And his trees kind of blocked the view, so he could not quite be sure what she was building. All he could see was there was a couple of ropes that were hanging down from some kind of structure. So he called his friend Javier, who had a much better view of Keisha's backyard. And he said, "What's Keisha building in your yard? I can't see it with my view." And so Javier walked over to his fence and peeked through a tiny hole in the fence that had been there for many years. And with his cell phone in one hand and a cold beer in the other, he replied, "Why, she's building a deck with railing on it. I can see it from the hole in my fence." Malcolm, however, was not convinced. After all, why would you hang ropes from a deck? So Malcolm called Drew, the other neighbor on the other side of Keisha's house, and he was sure he'd be able to see what Keisha was building. Indeed, he did see what Keisha was building when he peeked through the fence. It was a small guest house with a yellow door that had just been put in. Now, Malcolm was still not satisfied, so he walked to the fence and peered over it to see what he could see himself. And he was shocked at what he saw. It looked like she was building a boat, complete with anchors and rope. Later that day, Malcolm, Javier, and Drew met at Starbucks to gossip and compare notes about what Keisha was building. Now, every one of them knew exactly what Keisha was building. It was a guest house with a yellow door, a boat, and a decking. Each of them discounted the other person's version of what they saw. And as they sat there arguing among themselves, guess who walked in? Keisha. They abruptly stopped arguing, and of course, she noted the guilty look on their faces. She walked over to them and blurted out, "Ha! I guess you're all wondering what I'm building in my backyard." Each stuck to the story. "It's a deck with railing." "No, it's a boat." "No, it's a guest house." "Well, you're all wrong," she said. "Meet me at the house and I'll show you what it is." Much to their surprise, it was a tree house in the shape of a boat for her children, with a very large deck and railing. The ropes were there for them to climb on and to swing down on, and her children happened to love boats. That was the reason for the shape. Most of us are like Malcolm, Javier, and Drew. We peer through the fences for our information and can only see part of the story. And so we make decisions on a perspective that is only partially correct. We correct that we must become observers of our own assumptions. It is time for us to look beyond what we think is the truth and look for the greater whole, so we know that what is true. In the case of the Lyft driver, for Nadra saw the situation one way. She was being ignored. The Lyft driver who could not hear was seeing it a second perspective. Anea, the daughter, was the wiser because she saw both sides, both perspectives, and she read the sign. The process of taking our blinders off to see all sides of a situation is not easy, but making a pivot was not always meant to be. More importantly, Dr. Jenwright states, when we begin to courageously practice pivots in our perspective together, we recreate a society where everyone belongs and a world basking in the joy of justice. This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours, and so it is. Drew, thank you. Drew, would you come on up and give us a song before we do the offering, please?